The NRL Fantasy center position, some call it the graveyard, but I'm going to call it the land of opportunity. Look, it's a spot that isn't necessarily spoilt for Top Gun choice, but it's a spot where if you can play it right, you can absolutely make up ground in this position. So, center, first things first, 75 ranking for the position. It's the second worst position in fantasy, which is pretty disappointing, but hey, if you can get it right, it means that you make up massive ground on the other players. So a couple of things I want to point out here. We don't have anyone in this top sort of section at center, which means it is pretty much open plather in terms of who you target here. We've got a group here of really solid centers available. I'm going to talk about Bo Firma as well and how I don't think he's an option you should be targeting. I'm very against buying Bo Firma. Whereas guys like Garrick has the buy coming up, Dylan Lucas, job security issues, Gagai maybe, Hamiso, we could talk about him, Jack Whiten, Isaac Tungo, so the upside play there, but the low consistency. And then some other players here too, particularly guys that you might have in your team already, like Ethan Strange, Blaze Talangi, or Kale Iro, and the low upside of those options as well. So let's get right into it with the first ranked center. And we're going to go through these guys. I'm going to go through about 10 centers here, and then I'm going to give you my summary as well. So first center here, Dane Gagai, 75.9 buy score. It's pretty low in terms of the top center option. There's quite a few guys in the 70s. So top five are all pretty close to each other, but Gagai is that first option there. He has a #1 consistency score, so 70 points there for consistency, 44 points for upside, so #6 in that regard. So you're getting really consistent scores from Gagai. You're not getting the huge upside, and that's reflected by the numbers here. So 40 plus, 80% of the time, 50 plus, 60% of the time. So in 3 of every 5 games, he goes 50 plus, right? And you're getting 60 plus 20% of the time, and you're getting pretty good numbers for 70 plus and 80 plus as well. So he does pop up to some big scores, but not quite at the level of some other guys. But that consistency there, going 50 plus 60% of the time, for a center, that's fantastic. Dane Gagai, he's automatic. And if you want to buy a Top Gun center, he's probably that top guy. After the Knights buy, they have a buy this week. So next week, you'd be targeting him. Next up, Ruben Garrick, and Garrick is across the board really strong. So buy score a little bit lower, 73.8. He's got the #3 consistency and upside score here as well. And we're looking at him. It's a 79 and a 59, very close to our man here, Gagai, who's a 80 and a 60. So those are basically the same. With Gagai, you got the 20% for 60 plus. With Garrick, it's 36%. So Garrick goes 60 plus a lot more than Gagai does. And for that, you're getting, sort of 2 in 5 games, 60 plus, which means for the rest of the year, you're probably going to get about 3 games where he goes 60 plus. He has that big potential. Then 70 plus and 80 plus are about the same, probably a little bit higher in the 70 plus regard too. So that upside play is a bit higher for Ruben Garrick, but just doesn't quite have that bottom level consistency that Gagai has here. So very similar, very close in the scores. He does have the bye coming up next week, which is a bit of a challenge. And Ruben Garrick has shown a bit more injury risk than Gagai has this year too. So I'm going to factor that in as well. I'll also factor in the fact that there might be a resting down the stretch. Manly have quite a few very capable outside backs. And by that point, Leo Hapuati, Kola, these sorts of guys are all going to be back. So if Garrick is carrying an issue, we saw him go off in the 60th minute a couple of weeks ago. He does get a bit of a rest. So just factoring that in as well. But I'm a big Garrick fan too. Now, both those guys have buys either this week or next week, so that makes them a bit harder to buy. Whereas a guy like Isaac Tungo, he comes in at #3 on the data here. And the big thing I want to shout out, going back to the graph, is he sits up in this section here. So the upside of Tungo is massive. It is a smaller sample size we're getting this year. But I looked at last year, and he scores below 35 all the time, right? He pumps out a lot of low scores, but he has these massive games where he scores 75 plus for you as well. And he has that sort of 3-4 times a year. So I'm looking at Tungo. I'm looking at the fact that Cleary is back. I'm looking at Penrith at full strength, and I'm looking at their run home. And I'm thinking that this guy is right up there with the other options. So 72.7 is his buy score. Again, a lot of this is just based on the data, right? So I've based this on their current scoring, all their data from 2024, injury risk, job security, as well as a couple of other factors there too that feed in. But for Tungo here, you're looking at #3 rank here. Consistency is #14. So he's not a consistent option. You're only getting a 50 plus score 40% of the time. So you're getting a lot of scores below 40, right? But with him, the upside is #1 at 93, and you're going 80 plus 20% of the time. It is only 5 games. So that is only 1 score above 80. But I'm looking at his previous years as well, and he does maintain a similar ratio where he goes 75, 80 plus pretty frequently for a center. And he can score 2 or 3 tries in a game and just rack up massive points. So for Tungo, I like the look of him. I like the price, 428K. I think the fact that he scored relatively low last week is scaring a lot of people off him. But Tungo, I think, is a bona fide keeper for the run home. If I was buying a center, I would skip over a guy like Bo Firma, and I would go for Isaac Tungo instead. I'm going to talk about Firma, but he is a bit further down this list because the numbers really don't come out as good as you think they will. Zach Lomax next, so number 4 here, 72.5, very similar. Pretty solid consistency and upside scores from Zach Lomax. So you're getting 50-plus scores half the time. Very different ratio to these other guys, but 50-plus half the time it's very similar to the first couple of guys there. 40-plus most of the time as well, 2 and 3. You're not getting heaps of huge scores at 80-plus, but you're getting some 80-plus scores there as well. So all of these centers so far have scored above 80 or around 80, which makes them very attractive to me. And it really boosts their upside scores, which feeds a lot into the data. 60 and 70-plus, decent enough scores, but that 80-plus potential is really attractive when we're looking at a center for the run home. 698K, not an ideal price for him, but he averages about 51 when he's playing on the wing, so he is a very solid scorer. Jacob Kiraz, a bit different here. So he's a 47.8 average, a bit lower. A little bit of value there. 639K is a more attractive price. I like the dual position as well. So quite a few of the guys have been dual positions so far. But with Jacob Kiraz, if you got him, hold on to him. If you don't have him, probably not targeting him for a buy. But I do like the fact that he's 40-plus 60% of the time and 50-plus nearly half the time as well. Also has that potential to go to 60, 70, and 80-plus again. So he had that score in the 80s earlier in the year. That has really boosted his upside score. And he's number 5. He's looking at 9 and 7. Very similar profile to Lomax, just a little bit behind Lomax in a few key stats. So I like Kiraz a lot as well. He's a bit less attacking stat reliant than a lot of these guys too. Has a bit more of a work rate. So good shout for Kiraz. You can jump on him too. Val Holmes is next. And Val Holmes is a really streaky option. So this is one that I'm kind of excited about. And I don't think I can bring myself to do it. But I look at him, 589K. That is a crazy discount for Val Holmes. The 68.9 buy score. So this is where we drop, right? So the 70s, the first 5 guys were in the 70s. Holmes is in the 60s here. He's number 6. His consistency is quite low. His upside is quite high. So he is a similar profile to a guy like Tungo in that his upside is number 2. He can go 70-plus and 80-plus very aggressively. So Val Holmes, 13% of his games going 80-plus. That's one of the best in this list right now. 70-plus the same, 60-plus 1 in 4 games, right? But you are getting half your games below 40 as well. So basically, if you're looking at Val Holmes, I like the fact he's a goal kicker. I like the ball running. The tip that you're making there is I think the Cowboys are going to go on a run. And if you think that's what's going to happen, then Val Holmes is definitely the option for you. I'm a bit iffy on the Cowboys, so I can't bring myself to make this call. But I'm a big fan of it if you do like the Cowboys. Bo Firma's next, and he ranks in at number 7. And yeah, I'm just going to go over it again. I think he is so criminally overrated. So we mentioned him in the buys section of our buy, hold, sell video because we had to talk about him, right? He's a back row. He's been named at center. He's moved to center in terms of dual position as well. So we had to discuss him, but I'm not a fan of Bo Firma at all in terms of a buy. So I like him as a real life player. I'm a big fan of him for the Titans there, but I just don't like him for fantasy. And 662K, it's very expensive for him. You're looking at a stat profile here where the upside is number 13. He's not going big at all. Consistency also isn't as good as you'd expect. He has plenty of games in the 30s and 40s. So for him, 40 plus, pretty good with 71%, but he's only going 50 plus a little under half the time, and you're not getting the big scores here either. So when I talk about these other players and I say, oh, you know what, like Kiraz, for example, he's going 50 plus nearly half the time, but you're getting scores above 60 a quarter of the time. Getting scores above 70, 12% of the time, and 86%. Whereas for Firma, 70, he's getting that above that in 6% of his games. He's never going 80 plus. So both Firma of the list that we've said so far has the lowest high score in the year by quite a decent margin. So most of those guys have gone 80 plus before. I think one of them went 77 was the best. For both Firma, his best is 70. So he's quite capped. He's had some big attacking games this year, just hasn't had that big attacking output. And then you still do get the burden of those lower scores as well. So I would need, if I was going to buy Firma, I would need this 40-plus number to be closer to 90% to really trust him as that base stat guy who you can just trust to pump out good scores. And that's not there. That's at 71%. And the 50-plus score is much lower than I'd want. So without the upside, The consistency is a bit better than the other guys, but not enough to justify it. And the price is very expensive. So I have no interest in both of them at all, and I don't advise buying him. At the same time, he totally could come out and score a bunch of tries on the weekend and crush it. So if you like him and you think he's going to go on a big attacking tear, that's what you're picking. You're picking that attacking tear. You're picking the Titans to go on a bit of a run as well. If you think that's going to happen, have a crack at it. But I personally am not tipping that so hard. All right, Hamaso's next. And Hamaso's one that I actually like a lot more than his rankings suggest. So again, these rankings are all based on data. I'm kind of reacting to these rankings with you. So I've designed the model that takes all this data and gives you an objective ranking system that doesn't buy into narratives. It doesn't buy into trends. It doesn't buy into what people are talking about. It doesn't buy into my emotions as well. Because I know I'll be watching a game and thinking, oh, Hamaso looks good. I'll bump him up my list a bit. This doesn't read into all that sort of thing. So for Hamaso, I'm a fan of him, but it's a bit of a weird scoring profile. So you're getting that 68 buy score, which is fine. Getting a really high consistency score because his consistency has been fantastic, whereas the upside score is actually quite low. So you've got no 80-plus games from Hamaso, and you've had 50-plus 63% of the time. That's one of the best we've seen so far. So for Hamaso, he's consistently scoring between 50 and sort of 70 points. So half of his games sit between 50 and 70, and the rest are a little bit between 70 and 80, and a lot under 50 as well. So for Hamaso, I'm looking at him and I think, yeah, all right, that's a pretty consistent scoreline. But then the other part of this is he scored 11 tries in 8 games so far this year. So I'm only looking at his full games, by the way, at fullback, but 11 tries in 8 games, is that sustainable? I keep saying that Hamaso is not going to sustain his try scoring rate, and he keeps on doing it. So maybe I'm wrong on this, but I really just don't think you want to buy a guy who's going to need to score more than a try a game to maintain his average. 53 average is very attractive. The value is there, 590K. And if he keeps that up, he's awesome. I just don't know if I'm willing to make that bet. So me looking at this one, I'm going to let this one fly by. But if you like him, don't let me stop you. He could go on a tear. Again, you're picking the Dolphins to go on a bit of a run here, to be red hot into the finals. The other thing you're picking here, and the reason he's a bit lower than you'd expect, is I've factored in the fact that Hamaso can get rested. And the back end of last year, I know it was his first year at fullback, but he got a rest. He got moved to center. He got moved to wing. They have Trey Fuller, who's a fantastic player as well. So I look at all that and I think, you know what? If he picks up a niggle, he had a big origin series, whatever it is, he get a rest here and there, or he might move back to center for a bit, or whatever it is, right? So I just think there's a little bit of that risk there with Hamaso as well that doesn't exist for some of these other guys. Then going through Herbie Farmworth, he's at a similar point. So consistency upside scores pretty middling as well. And I'm a Herbie Farmworth owner. I'm a big fan. I was actually surprised by how the numbers panned out. But for him, you're only going 50 plus 30% of the time. You're not getting a lot of those massive scores either. The good thing about Herbie is that he doesn't really go below 30 though. So that's not really factored into this model too much. But I don't know. I think he's safe enough. I wouldn't be buying him. He's priced pretty highly. He's priced at a 47. You get a 49 average. He is what he is. I'm going to enjoy him for the ride home, but I wouldn't be targeting him as a buy option. Jack Whiten's interesting as well. So number 12. And again, I thought he might sit a bit higher too. But the big thing with Jack Whiten here is this upside score is terrible. like 19th place. That's only out of the players I looked at. So 70 plus, he never goes 70 plus. He never goes 80 plus, right? So you're getting really good base scores here where you're going, 40 plus, 50 plus, 2/3 of the time, but he sits between sort of 50 and 60 most of the time. So half his games, actually, half of his games are between 50 and 60, which is a great little nugget to have in your center spot. And when you bought him for, 400K, it's awesome. But now at 567K, he's closer in price to a few of these other guys. So he's closer to a Hamaso. He's closer to these other players. So for me, I wouldn't be targeting him at this point, but I do like him as a solid guy for the run home. His scores are decent. He still can, in theory, have one of those breakout games, but I don't see him as that big upside player compared to some of these other guys. So that's the issue with him. But at the same time, he can pop off as well. Just keep an eye on it. And Dylan Lucas is interesting here too. So he has really good numbers. 5th in consistency, 4th in upside. You've got really good numbers across here as well. But the issue with Dylan Lucas, for me, is the price point is pretty expensive. And also, I'm looking at him and I'm worried about the job security because he's been named at lock. He's played center. He's played off the bench, whatever, right? So if I knew he was going to play back row consistently, I'd be targeting Dylan Lucas over a guy like Bo Firma, personally. But for Dylan Lucas, that job security is really bad. It's really bad. So, in fact, he's probably the incumbent to be on the bench right now. So that's bumped his score right down, and he's a 13th place guy. Also has some injury history as well. Has that resting risk with what the Knights are doing this year. It's good numbers though. So it's 80% of the time he's going 40 plus. He's going 50 plus half the time. It's okay. 60 plus 36% and 70 plus 21% are bloody awesome. They're bloody awesome numbers. But 80 plus never. You'd want a few of those pop games to really boost him up. And then going through to Tomoko. So I think he's one of the last ones here. There's two more, I think. So actually, we'll talk about Iro in a sec as well. So Tomoko is in the 14 spot. I think Tomoko has some upside with Fogarty back, but numbers don't really back me up too much on that. Consistency score is dreadful. Upside score is okay. Price is good, 466K. 40 plus, 40% of the time, not ideal. 50 plus, 18% of the time is an absolute disaster. And there's not the upside games to back that up either. So if 80 plus was 18% of the time, I'd be like, oh, that's pretty good, right? But it's not there. Numbers aren't there for Tomoko. You're basically picking a form run. I will say though, with Tomoko, outside of just the high level stats, he hasn't scored a try in, I think since like round 5 or something like that. It's something crazy, right? So since Fogarty got hurt, he hasn't scored a try. If he starts scoring tries again, then his average bumps right up because a 40.8 average isn't terrible. And if he bumps up to 45, 50, then he could be a pseudo keeper. But again, you're picking a Canberra run, you're picking Tomoko to score some tries. So if you want to make that tip, 466K, I like him a lot, but you got to be making that call, right? So again, you decide for yourself. Joey Manu here is interesting. So Manu has a bit of a scaled up injury risk, a scaled up resting risk, and also I've factored into the resting risk that he has a bye in round 23 as well. So he's back in round 22, most likely, has that bye in round 23, and then comes back, round 24, 25, 26, 27. It's pretty dicey. So for him, he's number 15, good consistency score, pretty average upside score, hasn't been going 80 plus, went 70 plus once or twice, I think it was once. And then, yeah, look, decent scores here. So 40 plus, 50 plus, they're good numbers. And then it just sort of gets a bit worse. So Joey Manu, I sold him a couple of weeks ago. I really wanted to hold him. I looked into the numbers and I just didn't think he was worth holding on to. I will talk about a few other players here as well. So guys that you might be holding or selling. So KL Iro is really interesting. With Iro, the upside's not there. So the upside score is a 5 and the consistency score is in the 40s. So he's fine for consistency. He's middle of the pack in terms of consistency. But his upside score, so upside's on this line, consistency here, just in case anyone is new to graphs. But his upside score is not great. So he can't go big, basically. So that 60 plus score he had the other day, that was his first one. A couple other guys, Blaze Talangi, he actually, as much as he's a streaky, exciting player, he really never scores 50 plus. So he has a basement upside score. Ethan Strange very rarely goes 50 plus. That really doesn't go 60 plus. So again, really low upside score. RTS at center is what I'm marking here. Really dreadful fantasy option. But at fullback, oh my God. If he stayed at fullback long term, that's a different thing. But I think Nickel Clockstad will come back and steal that spot. They also have the buy in round 27. So for me, not worth the risk, RTS. Love him as a player. Don't like him as a fantasy option. And then we've got guys like Dean Mariner quite down here. Tommy Talau, he's been good without, really popping off. So the fact that he's in this keeper conversation is actually a compliment, by the way. This list doesn't include all the players who are really underperforming. So he's in this section of this group, but this group is the keeper conversation, right? So good on him. Selwyn Cobbo, what could have been? He might bounce back next year. We got Tomoko there, Ramian, Penasini with Moses. I was surprised he was actually still this good, but probably not an option I'm going to look at. And then down the bottom here, Jack Whiten, super consistent, but low upside. So very consistent low upside. Tungo, very high upside, low consistency. And then everything in between here. Bo Firma, not worth targeting. He's right in the middle of the pack there. He's actually behind Dylan Lucas as well on numbers, but Dylan Lucas has that weaker job security. So Firma's more exciting in that way. I just don't think it's worth, like, if you look at Iro and Firma, I don't think that's worth a trade right now. That's what I'm looking at, right? Because if we go into the middle forwards, for example, and I'm looking at this and I'm going, all right, I've got Iro and I'm going to sell him. I could buy Firma for 660K, or I could buy Isaiah Yeo for 760K, or Connor Watson for 750, or whatever one of these guys, Adam Fennell-Blake, quite cheap. I'm looking at it, I'm going, all right, well, he's down here, Bo Firma. Whereas these middle forwards, like, they take up that top quadrant, and that is one of the strongest positions in fantasy right now. Edge is really good as well. I did half yesterday, by the way. Check out the half ranking video too, but that has a lot of good options as well. I just don't want to spend money on center right now. So for me, I like McLean, for example. I don't have a stat profile on him because he's only played 2 games in first grade, but McLean at that price, fantastic option. If I was buying a center right now, I'm either going McLean or I'm taking a shot at someone who's got upside like a Tungo. Val Holmes could be crazy. Like Val Holmes could be one of those pods that really pops up for you, but you got to make that call. Other than that, I'm not doing too much in this section. I don't mind the Hamaso pickers, but it's a big gamble. I like Garrick. If you didn't have bye next week, I'd actually be recommending him as a target. But he is definitely a guy you should be holding on to. And then the rest, do what you're going to do with them. Okay, guys, that is the center rankings. Let me know who you're going to be getting in this week, if you're going to be getting a center at all. Hopefully you like these videos too. They're interesting. So there's a lot of data that goes into these, which I'm sort of using these as a bit of a tester to really go deep next year and do some really deep data-focused analysis on the preseason and build out more service for you guys so that you can interact with this data and actually sort of ask it questions and that kind of thing too. So let me know if you like these videos, and I'll keep making them, of course. I like doing it anyway. So even if there's 2 people watching, I'd probably do it. Anyway, guys, catch you later. Good luck.